just can come in.
So you'll let me know when to begin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Looks like lots of people are on time, so we won't have to wait that long. Everyone is eager to get started.
Great.
Hi, everyone who has already signed in. We're just going to give it a minute or two for people to sign into their Zoom to get into the webinar, and then we will begin. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I am seeing a raised hand. Yeah, we'll just give it maybe 30 more seconds for any stragglers, and then we can begin. All right, you can go ahead now, Amy.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Amy Bodman, and I'm a board member of the South Shore Joint Initiative, otherwise known as SSJI. On behalf of SSJI, I would like to welcome everyone today to our Flashback February presentation featuring Suzanne Pasternack and her wonderful film, Vanishing Legacy, which celebrates Prince Edward County's historic commercial fishery and its fishing families. We're delighted to be here with Suzanne and to be part of this terrific Flashback February series. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that the South Shore lies on the traditional lands of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga Nations, and that Indigenous peoples continue to live in Prince Edward County. We are dedicated to work together to protect, preserve, and restore this land for future generations. So the South Shore Joint Initiative is a group of partner organizations and members whose mission is to educate and advocate for the protection, preservation, and restoration of the South Shore lands and waters. The South Shore of Prince Edward County, which extends in our definition from Point Peter to Prince Edward Point, includes one of the longest stretches of largely undeveloped shoreline on the north side of Lake Ontario. It is a wild place, home to tremendous biodiversity, diverse ecosystems, rural landscapes, and a significant maritime history that includes a commercial fishery that is over 200 years old. At one point, it was one of the largest freshwater fisheries in the world. Suzanne Pasternack, who is a musician, filmmaker, writer, and photographer, among other things, moved to Prince Edward County in 1983. She has spent over 33 years collecting and documenting oral histories on the maritime history of Eastern Ontario, much of which focuses especially on the South Shore. This work has led her to create historically based folk operas, musicals, plays, 3 books, 2 documentaries, and 2 albums. I have had the pleasure to work with Suzanne over the last couple of years, conducting interviews and putting together her vast archive on the South Shore. Our plan is to publish a book in the next year, which will be an illustrated oral history of the South Shore commercial fishery, published by SSJI with the help of Steve Campbell at County Magazine. It has been a real honor to work with Suzanne and to meet the fishing families that hold so much knowledge about our cultural history and about the waters that surround us. So before I hand it over to Suzanne, I just want to say that Suzanne is here on the webinar and will be available to answer questions after we show the film. To ask questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, which looks like a comic book dialogue cloud, and type in your questions, or during question period, use the raise hand icon and you can ask your questions verbally. And lastly, I want to thank Megan Miller, who's our webinar master today, and she's done a tremendous, helped us so much to pull this show together. So thanks to you, Megan, too. So now, please welcome Suzanne.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited. After 25 years of sitting on a shelf, this documentary is going to be screened one more time, and I'm so glad you're here to watch it. I was so lucky to move to Long Point and the South Shore of Prince Edward County in 1988. I was surrounded by a community, a maritime community, wonderful commercial fishermen, women, and kids. A beautiful, beautiful culture that I realized was vanishing. And so with cassette players and cameras, photographs, video cameras, television crews, I began to document the final years of this beautiful culture. And that work continues to this day. Amy Bodman and I, for the South Shore Joint Initiative, have carried this work on and continue to interview, document, and the end result will be a new book about the commercial fishermen of Prince Edward County and women, as well as documentary and who knows what else we'll cook up. There was a time in Prince Edward County's history when South Bay and the South Shore was the living heartbeat of crime in Canada. Those were the rum running days. And the booze makers would hire the commercial fishermen of Prince Edward County, particularly Long Point, to transport in darkness across the lake to Oswego, New York, and Syracuse, smuggling booze for the booze makers, Gooderham and Warts being one of them. And so here's a song I wrote about the rum runners. Rum runners don't run by the light of the sun. Rum runners don't run by the moon. Never tell their wives, and they never tell their mothers, and they never tell the banks what they do. When the law comes around and they start asking questions, where were you last night and what did you do? They look 'em straight in the eye and they never confess, never breathe a word of the truth. Rum runners don't run by the light of the sun. Rum runners don't run by the moon. Never tell their wives, never tell their mothers, and they never tell the banks what they do. When the Coast Guard stops them in the middle of the lake, where were you last night and what did you do? They look 'em straight in the eye and they never confess, never breathe a word of the truth. Rum runners don't run by the light of the sun. Rum runners don't run by the moon. Never tell their wives and they never tell their mothers, and they never tell the banks what they do. Rum runners don't run by the light of the sun. Rum runners don't run by the moon. Never tell their wives, never tell their mothers, and they never tell the banks what they do. Woo! Rum runners don't run by the light of the sun. Rum runners don't run by the moon. So happy you all are here watching this. And just one thing, this documentary, Vanishing Legacy, won Best Documentary of the Year award at Cogeco, which was then Cable 13 Kingston. It was a co-production with Cable 13, so thank you very much to Cogeco and to all the fishermen who participated. Enjoy. I'll be here for question and answer after.
All right, so everyone get comfy. I am about to share the documentary.
I learned the fishery from my father, and my mother's family was fishermen as well, so I got the tradition. The boy that's fishing with me now is a Hudgens, which is a traditional fishing family as well. So he's probably got some knowledge from the Hudgens family of the fishing industry. The unfortunate part is that there is a limited number of people to pass the knowledge down. Like, I have no heirs. Well, I have an heir, but he's in the American Navy, and I doubt that he'll ever come fishing. Larry next door has no heirs. Bruce down the way has no heirs. The Spafford family have children, and whether or not they're interested in fishing as a livelihood, I don't know. But there are a number of us in the industry right now that have no heir to pass it to.
My home is on that rock-bound peninsula that juts out into the northeastern end of Lake Ontario called Prince Edward County. The eastern tip of Prince Edward is called Long Point, and it is the graveyard of the Great Lakes with its swirling currents and hidden shoals and sudden wild winds that have caused so many shipwrecks in the past. This is the story, the vanishing legacy of my friends and my neighbors, the last in their line to make their living off the waters of Lake Ontario.
I think the last number, I shouldn't even guesstimate it. I think it was 60. I'm not sure whether it's 30 or 60. The number of licenses has declined since 1950, absolutely radically. It's hard to believe how many people were licensed to fish at one time. It's easy to think that the number of fish in the lake has shrunk, but I find that a little bit hard to believe. Mind you, maybe the old-timers were satisfied with taking a few less fish or something like that, but I've also heard some stories of the catches they had, and their catches aren't really that radically different from mine in a sense, except for whitefish, which is pure insanity. I mean, when you're white fishing these days, if you don't have at least a half a ton, it's almost a washout day, because we have to catch them all within the month, well, the month of November and December. And it really is, it's a bit of a madhouse. It puts a lot of pressure on you to just go right out and catch every ton, literally, that you can in that short period. And often against the weather forecasts. We listen to the marine radio for the weather constantly, and we actually, once we've heard the marine forecast, we generally take a look at the sky from watching the way the current boils in the harbor entrance, how high the tide is in the harbor, what clouds are in the sky, what wind direction is coming, getting the best forecast you can, and then sort of extrapolating the whole thing, mixing it up and saying, okay, my gut feeling is this. And it's surprising how often we're right.
The fishermen's fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers fished these waters as well. Their knowledge of seamanship has been passed down from generation to generation. In the 1990s, there are a few differences between the fishermen of today and the old ways of their ancestors.
When Bill Amon first arrived here, he had a traditional Bay of Quinte boat, which was a shiplap skiff with a centerboard that went down beside the keel. And it obviously had been used for sailing. I've never heard the old-timers talk much about sailing, but I've heard stories of men rowing from Main Duck Island to get farm equipment and rowing and to South Bay, I think, and rowing the farm equipment back out to Main Duck.
How many miles is that?
Well, from here it's about 12 to the head of the bay, but even farther. Mind you, the skiffs in those days were far finer than some of the blunt objects we have here. Once in a while you see a really finely built rowing skiff reproduced in fiberglass. Larry here has one that's quite a fine model. But since the advent of power boats, they've got beamier. I think we tend to forget that with the finer skiffs and the fine entry, those boats rowed a lot better. Of course, the men were hardier too. The average bearer isn't going to row to Main Duck Island today. But just the general activity of the work we do around the fishery, lifting nets and handling our equipment, tends to build terrific upper body strength. Of course, most of these guys were also part-time fishermen. A lot of them, like my grandfather, he had his own mixed farm, and the fishing was actually for income. The farm was to feed the family. Mm-hmm. And any extra they grew on the farm was also income. But the fishery, most to the point here, actually, most farmers fished.
For these people who live their lives on the water, there has been a long tradition of the search and rescue of other vessels in distress on the lake. More often than not, the commercial fishermen arrive on the scene well before either the Canadian or the American Coast Guard. Rescues at sea are almost a way of life for them.
I towed a lot of boats off the shore, Seth.
Yeah?
Yeah, quite a few. There's a bar that runs from the island here over to Nut Island. Mm-hmm. I've towed boat after boat off of that bar.
Yeah? People just don't read their charts?
They don't read their charts. They pile right up and think they can go through there, and they can't. There's no water there.
Rescues can be very dangerous for the rescuer because the other party is generally quite excited, and they make some rather irrational judgment calls. They can do you a lot of damage in a hurry. They can really be difficult because you're dealing with combers and you're oftentimes on the wrong side of the boat to get the leverage you want to get him away from the rock, so you really get in some messes with that sort of thing.
A summer gale come up and blew off the shore, and the waves out around the main ducks were over 20 feet high.
20 feet.
And the brigantine came in there with a whole bunch of school kids on it. They're on the summer holidays taking training for sailing boats. And the captain took them up to the lighthouse, the main lighthouse, so they could get a look, see up there. Because you get up on top of that lighthouse, you can see all around the whole lake. You can see cakes in those Oswego, Picton on a clear day. But a storm come up while they're up there, and it went from a day like today, with a moderate wind of about 15 miles an hour, and the waves kept building up. And by the time they got back from the lighthouse with the kids, they couldn't. They tried to get one. They had went to shore from the brigantine on one of the little lifeboats, and they tried to get a lifeboat in the water. And the first wave came and just smashed it all. It was in pieces laying on the beach afterwards.
Yeah.
So they tried the second lifeboat, and it smashed that one. And the third one, they hung on to it, and they managed to get 2 kids out back on the brigantine.
And the rest of the kids were stuck on the island?
On the island, yeah. So in the meantime, a couple of the kids had thrown the big anchor off the brigantine, and they thought that'll hold it. But what they didn't know, there wasn't any shackle to hold the chain to the anchor, and it just went down plump to the bottom.
The chain down.
Yeah. So the captain got on the radio, and he radioed for the Coast Guard to come from Pringer's Cove out to help them see if they get the boat off the shore. And they said, well, we'll try, but it's an awful gale wind out there. We don't know if we get out or not. And so they came out a few miles and had to turn around and go back. They said their boat was just like a submarine. The waves were going right over the top of it. And so I heard them radio from the radio, ship-to-shore radio on our boat. And I told them I got a tug here in Main Duck Harbor, and we were just around the point.
So you were in Schoolhouse Bay?
They were in Schoolhouse Bay.
They were?
But I was in the main harbor, in Main Ducks. They're just almost together. And so I got the tug going, went around, and when they started to tighten up the line, a great big, it looked like a mast of another sailboat, great big, enormous, big long thing, came to the top, but it was over the top of the rope, and I couldn't move the brigantine. I couldn't maneuver the tug with that thing was right in the road. So I pulled and pulled and pulled, and we were chewing up a lot of gas in a hurry, and I wasn't prepared to really go out there to stay 2 or 3 hours. But after finally our tug started to drift around sideways to the wind, and I thought we were going to be on the beach right beside them.
Yeah.
I said to John, cut that tow rope. So he cut the rope with an axe, and we went around and grabbed the line on the brigantine the second time. And we pulled there for another hour and didn't see the move. Now all of a sudden, I seen her come a little bit. Then another big wave come in and lift her a bit, and she came a little bit more. And we kept doing that over and over, and finally we got her loose.
So, and you're doing this while battling 20-foot waves?
Right. So we get the boat pulled out. And we're talking back and forth from the brigantine on his ship to shore to our boat. And I said, when I tell you to drop that anchor, this time you drop it. Oh, no, don't drop the anchor. You got to take us to a sheltered spot. There's no sheltered spot in Main Ducks Island with a northeast wind. Don't matter what side you're on. So he didn't want to drop that anchor. So finally I said, if you don't drop it, we're going to let the tow rope go anyway and let nature take its course. So he dropped the anchor. But before we got back into the harbor, he was screaming, we're drifting. Get back out here as fast as you can and take a hold of us again. I was watching him pretty careful, and he wasn't drifting. Because I knew the bottom right there. We'd been fishing eel lines there, and the water's about 60 foot deep. And if you drop an anchor in clay bottom, you don't move it. And I knew the bottom. I knew it would hold him. So then we have all these 20 kids on shore that he'd had on the brigantine. And we had to find a place for them to sleep. And so there's a few sailboats in the harbor, and some took 3 or 4 kids, and somebody else would take 3 or 4. We took a bunch of them in the tug. And the next problem was to find food for them.
Was one of them sick?
One of them had diabetes. And his insulin was in the brigantine, which was on anchor at this time.
Right.
And I didn't know if we could get back out there to get it or not, but after an hour or so, I thought the wind had eased up a little bit, but the sea was still running in there like mountains. And I said, well, we'll take a run by and see if we can get the insulin. We did, and we got the insulin.
So they just threw it from...
They threw it from their deck over. I had a big door open the side of the boat. We got the insulin. Might have saved the kid's life, I don't know.
Have you ever heard a fisherman who couldn't tell a story? I sat wide-eyed listening to these stories.
One time I seen the eel at main ducks. You know how an eel swims through the water like that? Well, this one was swimming like a serpent.
Yeah?
And it was as big around as a stovepipe.
It was. Did you get it?
No, we didn't get it. I had a tool in my hand. I could have got it, but I was so stunned by the size of the thing. I got away.
Well, it's funny. I grew up around the fishery, and it never ceases to amaze me, the creatures that come out of this lake that I've never seen before. People up around the Bay of Quinte would probably laugh, but I never saw a mud puppy until I was, probably 16 or so. And the first one of those I saw, I couldn't believe this thing. It's like a fat salamander that is that long, and he's white with green polka dots. I mean, this looks like a cartoon.
Really?
And they live on the bottom, mud bottom areas. Raymond McIntosh had caught it out here in the bay. And apparently they're quite frequent in the Bay of Quinte area, but I had simply never seen one before. And of course it's got these great lacy gills, just like most salamanders have, and because he lives underwater, these are extremely lacy, and they're almost like lattice work. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, yeah, that would be a cartoon, all right. But, you know, it simply wasn't that uncommon a creature. It's just I'd never seen one come up before. And of course, it can be quite entertaining for someone who's never seen a particular creature before to get across one. Terry McIntosh, we traditionally hear fishermen's kids always do a little gill netting around the harbor for rockfish and perch and like that. It's sort of a training ground, as it were. Well, Terry had set just outside the harbor entrance here. Now, Terry at this time is like, 12, 13, 14 years old, and Terry wasn't a big boy at the time. And he caught a 6-foot sturgeon. Now, he had never seen a sturgeon in his life. He had probably heard about sturgeon, but when you get this 6-foot monster in your net, you kind of forget all the stories. You just know you got this really humongous fish in the net. Well, Terry was quite determined. This fish was not going to get away. It was in his net. It was his fish. So he grabbed it by the tail and managed to roll it into the boat, which for a kid that probably weighed 95 or 100 pounds soaking wet at the time was quite an accomplishment, because a 6-foot sturgeon is awfully strong. But he didn't know what he had, and he was determined that he was getting it ashore. Well, I think that fish sold for something like $200. They're a very pricey fish, but it's pretty comical because he had no concept of what he was rolling in the boat at all. To him, it could have been a shark. He wasn't sure. It sometimes makes you wonder if you should really be swimming in this lake, because there are some mighty strange things in there with you. I mean, most people, if they were aware that there were eels in this lake, would probably come storming out of the water, never to swim in fresh water again.
It never ceases to amaze me how calm and confident the fishermen remain in the face of howling gales and raging seas.
I never met one of them who ever admitted to being afraid while in the midst of a storm at sea. Have either of you ever been caught out in a storm when you were really worried? I know you have nerves.
I've never been worried, but I've been caught out in some bad storms.
Yeah?
One time I was caught over off of Pigeon Island there. I sat in whitefish nets and I had my son with me. And oh, it came an awful gale of wind. I swore it was going to tear the cabin off the boat. And Brian looked at me and he said, "Did you ever see anything like that, Dad?" I said, "I've seen a lot worse than that." He came back home and he told his mother, he said, "I felt all right after Dad said you've seen worse than that." But that was a bad storm.
Did you get scared?
I wasn't scared, no.
You guys don't get scared.
There's no use getting scared. It doesn't do any good.
I think anybody's fished on the lakes as long as you and I have, Howard, they can all tell stories about it.
I think so, Jim, yeah.
Because of ministry regulations, the fishermen are forced to catch whitefish during the perilous month of November off the isolated south shore of Prince Edward County.
Well, when things go wrong, they tend to go very wrong in November. For a start, the winds are usually blowing harder than they are in the rest of the year. We're about 8 miles up a shoreline that is totally unpopulated. You do feel kind of lonely back there when something decides not to run too well. But mostly all of us have marine radios now, which is fine as long as they're switched on. We've run into instances where we had a problem last fall, and
What happened?
the points in the boat welded together just outside the harbor entrance.
On your boat?
Yeah. I had 3,300 pounds of fish on board. As it turned out, the first thing we did was throw the anchor. I mean, you have this sort of procedure you go through, and we carry an outboard to get us off just in case the big motor fails. The outboard was up in front under the lifter, so it had to be unhitched from under the lifter, carried across the top of all these fishes. Like the boxes were stacked too deep, so you're going across the top of boxes of net and fish.
In the dark?
Oh no, this was about 10 o'clock in the morning. We'd started out at dark. We started out at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's still quite dark here. By the time we get up, dawn is just breaking, or when we get to our nets, so we can find them easily. But getting the outboard onto the bracket beyond the stern of the boat was quite exciting. And by the time I got it on and the tank hooked up and one thing and another, we were very close to shore. Fortunately, it started. We moved offshore. The anchor held our nose outwards into the breakers, and we came home under outboard.
At night. Last fall, I went up there. We got bad weather reports, and the weather wasn't too bad. And I went up and set a bunch of nets, and I put lights on them, on my buoys. And I pulled them about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we had about pretty near 2 ton of whitefish.
Wow. So,
But some of the boys fish right off the shore. I have them.
John Rohrback does that.
Yeah, they fish right off the shore. But I prefer, I'm getting old, and I prefer to fish out of the harbor with a motorboat where I can, don't have so much heavy lifting.
It seems like no fisherman ever retires. We just sort of grow old and harnessed. The ministry recognizes that us older fishermen are sort of running out of replacements, and they're actually facilitating the ability of somebody like the fellow that fishes with me coming into the industry.
Financially?
No, not financially, but as far as license transfers. It used to be licenses could only be transferred between families, down through the family. or to an already established commercial fisherman. Well, they've opened the door now that say, Landon who works for me can actually gradually buy into my license, which is a change of policy on their part, because they recognize that there are a number of us that have no heirs. And short of having no fishermen at all, they're going to have to do something.
But now I told my grandson that when I was through with my fishery, he could have it. So maybe there won't be anything left for him. But
How old is your grandson?
I think he's 22.
Yeah. So he's the youngest fisherman I've seen.
I think he may be about the youngest there is.
How
Yeah.
many are left? There's quite a few licenses around, but there's not many people who are actively fishing.
Most of the licenses, though, that exist now, there is somebody fishing.
Yeah.
What is it, down to about 22 now?
Lake fishermen,
Yeah,
something like that,
I
yeah.
think it's down in the 20s.
20-some.
And there's
And-
none anymore on the American side.
No,
No,
they're all gone.
So how does that make you feel? You guys are really the end of a
Well,
long tradition.
A long tradition, that's right, yeah. It's not good. At one time there was about 8 boats fishing out of here.
yeah,
At one time there was 45 fishermen on the main ducks.
yeah.
And at the same time there must have been, I would say, maybe 20 fishermen fishing out of Point Travers.
And same at Indian Point.
Indian Point, and the head of the island here.
Yeah, there
I'm the
was,
only one left on Amherst Island.
July 5th, 1996, my friend, Howard Wellbanks, was gill netting for perch. That was the day he died. He was 74. He took sick out on the boat and died with his boots on. Roxy always used to say Howard worked so hard that he'd wear 2 men out who were walking behind him, that he was impatient of anything that kept him from fishing. If the wind was bad, he'd pace up and down the beach, weaving a path on the shoreline. Howard's grandson, Hugh Allen, is now captain of the Noreen. The torch has been passed. As I look at Hugh, I wonder, when he's gone, will this legacy have finally vanished?
The only life you knew, and you weren't scared of anything, not high seas or storms, blinding snow couldn't keep you from finding your way home. Hard work, hard liquor, you were a hard driving man, and you died with your boots on. I bet that was your plan. La, 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 I always thought I'd see you again. I had something to tell you, but I never had the chance. I had something to tell you, but I waited too long. You were my hero, and now that you're gone, sometimes late at night on a highway, I go past your door. I remember your kindness in that house upon the shore. And as I travel this world, skies so blue. You weren't scared of anything, not high seas or storms, blinding snow couldn't keep you from finding your way home. Hard work, hard liquor, you were a hard driving man. You died with your boots on, I bet that was your plan.
Okay. So we're going to start the Q&A with Suzanne right now. If you have any questions and you want to put them in the chat box, the chat icon is just on the very bottom of your screen. It says chat with a little speech bubble, and the chat box should pop up to your right-hand side and you can type that in there. Or if you would like to verbally say your question to Suzanne, just raise your little hand icon and I can unmute you and allow you to talk that way. So we'll just give it maybe a minute, just so people can type if they want to. And Suzanne, if you want to get Ellen to unmute your one as well, because you're currently on mute. Perfect. Okay, so we've got a couple of raised hands. All right, I will unmute. Nope. People are not raising their hands anymore. All right, Libby. Go ahead, Libby.
Oh, hi. Hi. Hi, Libby.
Oh, you put yourself on mute again.
Okay.
There we go.
We good?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say how fabulous it is. It's not really a question, but thank you for doing this. And Amy, thank you for doing it. I have Becky Williams beside me here, and her brother.
Father, my family.
Father.
My nephew now.
Peter is a county fisherman on Big Island. And so Becky especially enjoyed the Vanishing Legacy film. And we thought it was just fabulous. We wanted to tell you congratulations and thank you for doing this for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. I have been told that the chat was disabled. I have changed the settings now so you can't actually write it. Sorry for that. I will unmute Boris now, who has his hand raised.
Yeah, I have my hand raised. Okay. No, I was just going to mention that the chat wasn't working, but I'd like to say hello to Suzanne and say that it just felt like watching, I don't know, an old movie that is 4-star rated or a documentary. And it just shows you what history is. And I think we're all losing touch with history. So I think this video will be something that will be viewed years later. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful documentary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. I'm going to unmute Libby again because her hand is up. I'm not sure if you have another question or if it's just an old.
I don't know how that does that.
I don't know how, but anyway, we wanted to say that very much appreciate what everybody's done. And are people going to be able to see this, Suzanne? They're going to be able to, it's going to be on YouTube?
Well, yeah, it's my understanding that SSJI will organize it so it goes up on the YouTube channel. I'll also talk to Barb Sweet, the head of the Prince Edward Libraries, about making it accessible through the library as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
Good. Thank you,
And
Libby.
thanks to Libby for putting up the film crew this week.
All right, we have a question in the chat box. Which direction did the rum flow, from the US to Canada or the other way around?
During American Prohibition, it went from Canada to the United States. But during the time in the 90s, while I was filming and interviewing people for this film, I heard lots of stories. Alcohol wasn't run from the States to Canada by the commercial fishermen. It was enterprising people who could buy, Canadians who could buy booze really cheap in the States and bring it home via boat to Canada. So it seems to go both ways. But the big industry was definitely during the American Prohibition in the 20s, where it came from Canada. There was one rum runner from Prince Edward County, Bruce Lowry. He ran so much booze, and Howard Wellbanks, one of the gentlemen I was interviewing, told me he ran so much booze during the Prohibition that Gooderham and Warts gave him a lifetime job once the Prohibition was over.
Okay. Is there still potentially sufficient catch to serve commercial volume fishing?
I'm not able to answer that right now.
Okay.
You know, as a documentary maker and also working full-time on this now with Amy Bodman, with the commercial fishing people who are still working. I'm not an academic or a scholar at all in the area. My job is to capture the story and the images. So, but that's something I can find out.
All right. Another one. Thank you, Suzanne, for this. Have you found there are stories and songs from Prince Edward County still sung and told to this day, and where you find and hear them?
This is something that is on my list of things to do, and I have found lyrics of ballads written, lake ballads written in Prince Edward County. One of the great balladeers was Henry McConnell, and from way back when. But I have not been able to find any music. But I came across an old article in the Picton Gazette, and so y'all can track it down. I have that on my list of things to do. Parks Canada came to Prince Edward County, it seems like maybe the late 50s, early 60s, and recorded Henry McConnell and other county sailors singing their songs. So they are somewhere in the National Archives or the National Library or through the archives of Parks Canada. So definitely, anybody go on the hunt for that, keep me in the loop. I think it's a matter of just filling out some forms with Parks Canada to have them do a search in their archives. But that would be worth so much, not financially necessarily, but those old recordings are like the ones, you know, that Alan Lomax got out of the Appalachian Mountains. Historically, it's that important.
And another question, how many people are fishing commercially now?
Again, I can't answer that, but I can find out the answer. In the documentary you just saw, Howard Wellbanks thought, and this was in 1995, Howard said this on the documentary, he thought there were 22 still fishing in Prince Edward County. I don't know what those numbers are now, but I can find out. Again, I'm not a scholar in this area, just the story catcher and the image capture person.
I'm wondering, what are your inspirations and sources for your own storytelling and music practice?
I love to listen to people's stories. And when I hear one that inspires me, like the story of Minerva McCrimmon, where I ended up writing a folk opera that's gone on for years, and sometimes just regular people, and their stories ignite me. For the child soldier, 1918 child soldier from Hillier, it was a 1-paragraph article in a newspaper I saw about this young boy from Hillier who ran away from high school and joined World War I when he was just 13, was discharged, sent back home to Hillier, ran away again, enlisted, ended up fighting in Vimy Ridge, got found out, sent home to the, on and on. And it was just 1 paragraph, and I knew it was a huge story people would love to hear. So then I do all the background research on it, and with that one in particular, it was the War Museum in Ottawa and the National Archives, where I did a lot of research.
Right. Not a question, but a comment. Thank you, Suzanne. Many of my ancestors were fisher people, farmers, and lighthouse keepers in the Long Point area, and this has special meaning.
Uh-huh.
That was from Anne Bongard.
Hi, Anne. I think people don't, I just want to say one thing about stories, all of our stories. People think that their stories aren't all that interesting, but people's stories and life histories are extremely interesting. They really are.
I know you commented that you didn't know how many fishermen were active right now, but another comment was from a Shirley. I know of only one currently active fisherman, Solomon, Syrian chap. They also asked if you knew of any others.
Oh yeah, Amy and I have been filming all the working fishermen for the past couple of years at this point too, or the newly retired and still working. So, and young people too. Teal Baberstock, Joanne and Kendall Dewey, on and on, Dave Harrison. And yeah, there's quite a few. And we're out there on the boats with them.
All right.
We just wanted to add, when we mentioned Peter, you say it. What's the name of it? Bay Williams Fishery?
Oh, Bay Williams Fishery. And then Dewey, those two with this, and the Syrian lad as well.
Yeah.
So there's a few, and I think there's also Harrison's and Cressy still fishing, I believe.
Yeah, Dave Baberstock still goes out.
Yep,
Davey Baberstock, right?
Yeah. Tim McCormick, he's still fishing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tim McCormick.
So still a couple out there. It's good. Right. Another one. Thanks so much, Suzanne. Can you tell us what the most surprising thing you learned about fishing in the county?
When I first started to interview the Howard Wellbanks and the also people who weren't in the documentary, because when I first started interviewing, I was just using a cassette tape recorder back in the late 80s. So what really did surprise me and touch my heart were the commercial fishermen at the time in the 90s. Well, their fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, so on and so forth, were all people who made their living off the Lake Ontario, seafaring people, whether lighthouse keepers, commercial fishermen, commercial sailing, so on the schooners, captains on the schooners. It was such a rich, rich culture. And the older ones, again, in the 90s, I was able to capture the stories about their fathers and grandfathers and their moms and grandmothers working out on the lake. And it's such a long tradition that so many people, newcomers in the county, have no idea of our maritime history.
This question comes from Myrna Wood. Are you in contact with Susan Yanku?
Not anymore.
Another one. Where are the current fishermen currently working out of?
So Kendall and Dewey, Joanne and Kendall Dewey, they're out of Wellington. Amy, where's Dave fishing out of? Harrison.
He fishes out of Indian Point.
Right.
Indian Point. Tim's fishing out of Long Point. I think there's some others leaving from Long Point too.
Dave.
And then Dave Baverstock's fishing in Athol Bay and around those areas.
Okay. Evelyn says, thank you, Suzanne. I first saw this documentary in 1977 and enjoyed it as much today as I did then.
Wow, thank you.
Janet asks, did you write the music specifically for the documentary and or in memory of well banks?
For the documentary. And well, the last song we heard, yeah. I was so sad when Howard passed away. We were there just a couple of days before he died filming, and I made plans to come back around July 10th, but he passed away on the 5th. He was out setting nets. So it inspired me to write a song about him, fully intending it to be in the documentary.
Linda has commented, I love that you made this documentary and praise your efforts to keep the memory alive. I was born and raised in Newfoundland and come from a long line of fishing families and now choose to call Prince Edward County home. I see a lot of similarities concerning the demise of the fishery and with that an economy and jobs. I have a question. Is what is caught here in the county now sold commercially, locally, or more interprovincial or internationally?
So Dave Harrison and Dave Baverstock, their fish are being processed. Where's that plant? Amy, I need your help.
Do you mind? Okay. Well, Dave Harrison, I mean, we just recently interviewed him. He takes a lot of his fish to Wheatley, which is on Lake Erie. And actually they're fish that get, that even come all the way from Winnipeg there, and then they get processed. They have to go through, I'm not exactly sure what the process is, but they have to be inspected by the government, and then they get brought back to be sold in the county locally. Also Peter Williams, whom his relative mentioned, he also has a fish house that I know Dave and a number of people bring it to. There's Sleeman that you've already mentioned, who's doing those too. I'm not quite sure whether they all take them to Wheatley to get inspected or not. So I'm not quite sure exactly how that works. I just wanted to say about Peter Williams, we've heard him mentioned in a number of different interviews, so we're really hoping to interview him too and find out more about where he fishes and his operation. So thanks.
He's on our hit list.
He's on our hit list.
Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, as far as answering your questions, Amy and I just in the past couple of days have done almost 6 hours worth of filming and interviewing. So we've been gathering a massive amount of information just in January and February, taking the time while people aren't moving around so much to film them, including Dave Harris and Dave Baverstock, on and on. So we haven't even gone through the material that we've collected yet. We're just busy getting it in the can, so to speak.
I have a comment from Sid. This is a little bit of an historical fun fact, I guess. Prohibition was nationwide in the US, but only provincial in Canada. Distilleries were federally regulated, so you could make booze in Canada, but not sell it retail. My grandfather used to make pre-made cocktails in 500-gallon batches for sale by the rum runners in bottles in the US. Prohibition ended in Canada in 1927, but not until 1933 in the US.
Yay, Canada.
We've got the goods. David has said, thanks so much, Suzanne. Great documentary. At the time in the 1980s, 90s, I was living in North Carolina when and where the coast culture and fishing industry was also vanishing. I've sailed Lake Ontario for the past dozen years in my 27-foot boat. Getting a sense of the culture here means a lot to me and offers me some important context. A question. Are you still in contact with the people you interviewed and or their families?
Yeah. Yeah, especially, I mean, the ones, the interviews that I shot for this documentary, and another one I did on the commercial fishing in the Long Point area. So there were two that came, and yeah, these folks were my friends. So, and some of them have passed away already. Emma and Ray Lancaster and Howard Wellbanks, Jim Scott, when he talked about the saving of the brigantine, the tall ship. But I'm lucky enough to still have some of my long friends still with us, like John Rohrbeck, who's been a huge source of information to Amy and I. So we have hours and hours and hours of interviews with John that we will be going through and editing.
Seem to have a lot of people in attendance today that have special connections to the industry. Kathy says, thanks for this. Worked with the M&R as a student with the PEC commercial fishermen in the 80s. Loved hearing the names again. They were all wonderful people. And Howard Wellbanks, so nice to see him again. Another question. You mentioned the Smithsonian recordings. Are there any other places or projects of recording cultural histories that you take inspiration from?
That's pretty much the main one. And certainly have been inspired by the work of musicologists like Alan Lomax, who did go into the Appalachians and gather music, and surprised to see that the folk songs in the Appalachians during the Depression were really Elizabethan. They had stayed intact from the time the first settlers came over. But that's something that inspired me when I was young, and inspired me to do the work I do now. And that is making a permanent record of these stories, these oral histories.
This is from John Foster, a most excellent piece on PEC fishing. What has happened to these special fishing boats? The special fishing boats.
Right. That I don't know, but I can find out.
May I jump in here a little bit? Is that all right? One of the people we recently interviewed is George Henley, who actually had a boat making business here that he took over from Ray McIntosh. Is that correct, Suzanne?
Right. So they were two master boat builders in Prince Edward County. And I know that I think they both did some commercial fishing too. Certainly Raymond McIntosh was a wizard on the water, so they said, but they both were master boat builders.
And a lot of the fisher people are still fishing with George Henley's boats. They're still out there on the water. And somebody kind of bought there's a long story, but there's still George Henley boats being made in somewhere in Canada. Sorry.
Right, under his name.
Under his name, yes.
His name.
Pretty great. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Libby is raising her hand, so I'm just going to click allow to talk. Libby, if you want to put yourself on mute. If you're talking, Libby, we cannot hear you. You just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry. I think I just put the hand up before. And so I think I've said everything I want to say, except congratulations to all of you, and keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thanks, Libby.
Okay, I will lower your hand. I will lower your hand so I don't get confused again. All right. I think there's one more comment in the chat from Janet. Thank you for this interesting documentary and beautiful music. Oh, and Cheryl has also said something. Hang on. SSGI owes Suzanne a huge debt of gratitude. She is doing this work totally as a volunteer and because it is important to her. We are all benefiting from her hard work and dedication. Thank you, Suzanne.
Well, thank you, SSJI gang, for helping to preserve the South Shore. It's a part of my life burned into my soul, for sure.
All right, I will give it 2 or 3 more seconds in case, yep, more people are saying thank you so much to you. If you have any questions, I will give you 5 more seconds to type really fast.
May I say something, Megan?
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
John Foster's perhaps sent a link to possibly the recordings that you were talking about, Suzanne.
Really?
History. So we should get that down.
Okay.
And
I will write it down and send it to everyone.
And also, I mean, everybody out there in listening land, if you want to contact me and have any further questions, just get a hold of SSJI. They'll give you my email address.
For sure.
And may I add that too, if there are more people you think we should be interviewing, please let us know too. That's really important. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Megan.
Okay, I'm seeing no more comments. So yes, all right. Thank you everyone for attending this year's Flashback February, and thank you very much to Suzanne for sharing the hard work that she has put into this documentary. Also to Amy for helping her out in the current pieces of collecting this important piece of cultural heritage in the county, and taking time to answer questions today. Flashback February is organized by the county museums. If you want to partake in other events, they still have 2 more days of activities, both in person and online, which you can find online at their website, visitthecounty.com. And I will post that link in the email that I send you all with the recording for today's session. Again, this webinar was recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we will be sending out the link so you can share it with your friends or rewatch it again if you'd like. Yeah, have a great rest of the day, everyone. Stay safe, stay warm, and we look forward to having you again in our next webinar. Bye. Have a great day.
Thank you, Megan. Everybody.
Bye.
Suzanne.